Hi everyone, I'm Dale Smith, aka Journo Dale, and we're here to talk about Canadian politics. Over the last couple of weeks, my social media has been flooded with a lot of questions about why the king isn't saying anything about the threats to our sovereignty. And I've written columns about this, and my video with Patricia last week touched on a little bit. But one thing that people have asked me is, what is the value of having a monarch if he won't say what they want him to say? And if we're going to set aside that particular question because he says what the prime minister asks him to say, but in terms of what the other benefits of having a constitutional monarch are, so I figured let's talk about a few of those. I'm going to recommend that you go and find a copy of Canada's Constitutional Monarchy from Nathan Tidbridge. It's a really good resource, and it's pretty easy to read and lots of nice pictures about the monarchy in Canada. But so with that in mind, the first and most important thing is that an apolitical head of state, like a constitutional monarch, is really important in the event of some kind of a constitutional crisis where there are questions around the prime minister, the head of government, and having a constitutional fire extinguisher who, again, is apolitical. And that is something that is incredibly important to have, even though it is something we will hopefully never have to ever use. I like to say that the first rule of constitutional monarchy is that you don't drag the king into your fights. We have seen issues, I think it was Tuvalu, about 10 years ago or so. There was a fight between the prime minister and the governor general. They tried to dismiss one another. Messages were sent to the queen at the time in order to try and gain leverage. In the end, the governor general won out. The prime minister was dismissed. Fresh elections were had shortly thereafter. Things resolved themselves, but essentially, you do not want to ever bring the king into your political fights. And that's one of the things that we're sort of dealing with right now. Everyone wants the king to say something, but because this is a very fraught political fight, particularly with the American president, this is something where you don't want your apolitical head of state to be freelancing and coming in with his own opinions when he has not been asked by the government to do so. Yes, it would sound nice if he swooped in and said something, but that also creates more problems than it solves. I mean, the whole thing after the Glorious Revolution in 1688 was that Parliament controls the monarchy and not the other way around. And that's a very, very important thing to remember. All right, so apolitical head of state, constitutional fire extinguisher, incredibly important to have. The American system, for example, fuses the head of government with the head of state, and that creates all kinds of problems. A lot of them are symbolic in terms of who is the representative of the government. A monarch is the personified embodiment of the country, particularly a constitutional monarch for whom they are bound by Parliament and the laws and the Constitution of the country. They are a living embodiment of it, and that is one of the reasons why it's their face on postage stamps, it's their face on the wall in an embassy, those kinds of things. And it's not the face of the current head of government there. It goes to this power dynamic of who has the power and who exercises the power. And the crown has the power, but it's the head of government who gets to exercise it. And it creates a bit of a tension dynamic, which is important for reining in heads of government. One of the things that we are especially witnessing south of the border is when your head of state and your head of government become a cult of personality. That's a really big problem, and we are witnessing that happening right now. Having an apolitical monarch as your head of state, as your embodiment of the country, separates that and keeps a check on your head of government from having too much of a cult of personality, too much of a personal influence over what is defining the country, and that's again an important thing to have. One of the things with the crown is that it's the fount of honors. So all of the kinds of things like the Order of Canada, Order of Military Merit, those kinds of awards, provincial orders, for the most part, though one or two provinces are not royal headed, which is a bit of a thing, but we're going to just kind of gloss over that for the moment. But anyway, having the monarch as the center of those orders keeps them apolitical, and so that's an important thing in terms of being able to honor Canadians, to honor military personnel who have exemplary service or so on. And have it come from the monarch and not the head of government is important because it depoliticizes it. It's not an award from a partisan actor. It's an award from the embodiment of the country. That's an important thing for national unity. That's an important thing for our sense of Canadianness, of national identity. Those are important things that having the apolitical monarch who is the center of that keeps these things from becoming politicized. This is one of the reasons why I'm a big critic of the Prime Minister's Teaching Award, which 2 or 3 prime ministers ago decided to come up with, which is, again, it because it's coming from a partisan actor, it ends up having problems with people who are nominated for these awards and who may not want to accept them because they don't like who is the prime minister at the time. And that's one of the reasons, again, why it's important that these things come from the apolitical monarch, so that there isn't a partisan taint to these kinds of awards, to these things that are at the center of culture and Canadian unity. So that's another really incredibly important thing. One more thing in Canada in particular is the treaty relationship with First Nations. Those are with the Crown directly and not with the governments. And there is a almost personal connection between the Crown and those First Nations as a result of these treaty relationships. And if we did not have that, it essentially makes the colonial project complete. And that's something that a lot of people don't really think about when, they talk about, getting rid of the monarchy and so on. In Canada, because those treaties are tied to the Crown, and that the honor of the Crown is an important legal principle in terms of enforcing those treaties, particularly now more than at any point in our country's history, that's an important component for reconciliation, for the point of the treaties, which is to share the land, the enforcement of those treaties. All of that stems from the Crown, and getting rid of that and turning these over to partisan actors becomes a problem in the broader scheme of things, and so that relationship is in part how we've made this country work for 150 some years. So it's something we can't really just easily dismiss, particularly when people are having a fit of pique over what's going on with the monarch right now, or what they perceive is what is going on with the monarch right now. So those are all important things. I think those are I think those are incredibly important to have, particularly for a constitutional order that is incredibly stable. And we have had a long-serving democracy and a long-serving constitution in this country, longer than almost any other country on this planet, and that's kind of important. And that's one of the reasons why having a constitutional monarchy like ours is terribly important. If there's a move to get rid of that, again, that's going to be essentially rewriting the entire Constitution, and the negotiating formula for that in Canada is a very high bar, and it's probably going to be a near impossibility, because I don't know that anyone could come to an agreement on what they would want to replace the monarchy with. That's what happened in Australia. They had this referendum on getting rid of the monarchy, and they came up with a replacement system that absolutely nobody was happy with. And in the end, they not only kept the monarchy, but support for it increased, because they suddenly had an idea about why it's harder to replace than they think it's going to be. And in particular for a country like ours, where we are multicultural, multilingual, have a broad geographic diversity, trying to find an apolitical head of state in some kind of an elected or appointed capacity would be incredibly fraught and incredibly difficult. And it doesn't take you much digging to see that there's been controversy with pretty much every governor general in this country based on some perceived slight or fault. And having, one of the virtues of monarchy is the continuity, is the fact that you have one family that is devoted to service for their entire lives. It's one of those gilded cage kinds of situations, and it tends to work out pretty well for the most part. Particularly given that, post 1688, we get to control who the monarch is. And so if we have a monarch who is a problem, Parliament can always change that. So again, I think there's value in having this structure, this constitutional structure. And even if people are upset over their perception of what they think he should be doing right now, I think we need to put this in the bigger picture, and realize that there's value in this system, and that getting rid of it is not only going to be very difficult, but replacing it is going to be pretty much impossible in a country like ours. So something to think about. And that's everything for this week. Join us again next week for some more Canadian politics. I'm Dale Smith. That's at Journo_Dale on Twitter, and JournoDale no_ on Bluesky. And don't forget to like the video, share, subscribe, and support us on Patreon. Thanks, everyone.